Hello, Matthews Gatos here. Welcome back to section 6.2, part 2, division. Before we get into that, let's review multiplication first. So because this is a review question, I really recommend you pause the video at this point, do the question yourself, and come back to see how you've done, because it will give you some immediate feedback. So to do this question here, we're told that when I multiply these two fractions together, it will simplify to be just a whole number. So let's go through the process. Let's factor first. So first step in any kind of simplifying question is going to be to factor. So I'm going to factor the numerator and factor the denominator. So I start with the greatest common factor in the first numerator, greatest common factor in the second denominator. Then the first numerator in the second fraction also has a GCF, as does the denominator. So if this question doesn't emphasize how important greatest common factor is, I don't know what will. Once I've done my greatest common factor, I can go a little bit further with denominator number 1 and numerator number 2. So I'm going to do that in my next step. So I factor my difference of squares and I factor my trinomial. Now, the next step in the process is to state my restrictions. So stating my restrictions, I look at the denominators to do that. So looking at the denominators, oh my gosh, 3 times is a charm here, okay? I have double trouble here. So I have 3 times x minus 2 and x plus 2 and 2 times x plus 3. All of those, actually that would be triple trouble, wouldn't it? All of those can't equal 0. So for 3x times x minus 2, I'll divide both sides by 3. And then I get x minus 2 can't equal 0, so x can't equal 2. For x plus 2, I just subtract 2 from both sides. And then here, divide both sides by 2 and subtract 3 from both sides. So let's put our restrictions in order from smallest to biggest. So here I'm going to have that x cannot equal 2, negative 2, I'm going to start with negative 3, negative 2, and positive 2. Now I know the question didn't ask for restrictions, no extra charge for that one. It's really just asking you to simplify and find the value of m. So what I want to do next is simplify by removing all my common factors. This is probably my favorite step because you get to cancel everything out. So you can see I've done this with colors. X minus 2 and x minus 2 cancel. X plus 2 and x plus 2 cancel. The greens, x plus 3 and x plus 3 cancel. So what I'm left with in the numerator is 36 times 6 over 3 times 2. Now, you could put this straight into your calculator, but what I notice is that I have 3 times 2, which is 6 in the denominator, and 6 in the numerator. So really, I could just cancel those out to make the math a little bit easier on myself. So 6 divided by 6, and my answer is 36. So the whole number that it simplifies to be would just be 36. Again, you guys know I'm a big fan of the check, so I'm going to put this into my calculator. I'm going to put the original part into y1. I'm going to put my answer of 36 into y2. So let's do that. The check always happens in the table, and look, it's always equal to 36 with the exception of your non-permissible values. So that tells me I did my question correctly. So let's move on to division. So hopefully you guys have your glasses on. We talked about this before, about how glasses help with division. And let's review from junior high how we divide fractions. So you guys might have learned this in a couple of different ways. You might have learned KFC or kiss and flip, however you want to do it. I just say keep, change, flip. That's how we divide fractions. So we keep our first fraction the same. We change the division to multiplication, and we flip our second fraction. And then we just go ahead and multiply and reduce. So when I'm doing this in the numerator, I'm just going to multiply 7 by 14, and in the denominator, I'm going to multiply 8 by 1. So 7 times 14, 98 over 8. And then I would just look to see how can I simplify this further? So I see that 98 has a common factor of 2, so does 8. They have a common factor of 2, so that would be 49 over 4 in lowest terms. And in Math 20-1, we're okay leaving it as an improper fraction. And that would be as far as you go. So let's take that idea and use it with monomials. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I am going to keep, change, flip. So I'm going to keep my first fraction the same. I'm going to change the division to multiplication, and I'm going to flip my second fraction. Now, let's talk about restrictions. In the original, we have restrictions that you can't divide by 0. But in the second step, because we flip, we have an additional new restriction. So for division, we have to pay special attention to those restrictions. Okay, so we have restrictions here that is 3y, 8y squared, and 9. Okay, so we have to pay attention to that new restriction in the denominator. So what I like to do is in the original equation, I look at all 3 of those areas, the 2 denominators and the numerator of the second fraction when I'm dealing with division. So you can see there, the only thing that's happy to divide or to be a 0 could possibly be the first numerator. All the other ones cannot be 0. So my restriction, because I'm just dealing with monomials, is that y can't be 0. So now that I've set it up for multiplication with my restriction, I'm just going to go ahead and multiply. So 4 times 8 is 32, and then I have x, y squared. Then in the denominator, I have 9 times 3, which is 27, with just the y. So to simplify this, 32 and 27, they don't have any common factors, but I notice that the y's are in common right here. So I'm going to simplify that. So 32x stays where it is, 27 stays where it is. Let's look at the y's. Y squared divided by y. I have more y's in the numerator, and I have 1 more y. So 2 take away 1 is 1. So it's just y in the numerator. So this is my final answer with the restriction that y can't be 0. Let's try another one. Okay, so again, we're going to keep, change, flip. I know that I'm going to do that, but let's do my restrictions first. So looking at my restrictions in 3 places, basically everywhere except for numerator number 1. So I have a whole bunch of monomials. Remember, the restriction for monomial is that variable can't equal 0. So there we are. Now I'm ready to keep, change, flip. Keep my first fraction the same. Change the division to multiplication, and then flip my second fraction, which is really taking the reciprocal. So division questions can be turned to multiply by multiplying by the reciprocal. So let's go ahead and multiply. 4 times 8 is 32. X squared times x cubed. Laws of exponents tell me to keep my base the same and add the exponents. 3 times 3 is 9. X and y cubed. Okay, so let's look to see if we can simplify. So looking at 32 and 9, they don't have anything in common. The x's have something in common, and the y stays where it is. So I know right now I have a 32, a 9, and a y cubed. Let's look at my x's. I have 5 in the numerator, 1 in the denominator, so more in the numerator. Laws of exponents tell me to subtract. 5 take away 1 is 4. So that would be my final answer. You might be wondering why I'm not checking on these questions, because when I have 2 variables, I can't check on the graphing calculator. Okay, let's look at how we divide expressions that have binomials and trinomials. So just like multiplication, factor the numerator and denominator fully. That's really the key to all of these questions. I want you to keep everything in factored form for the whole question. List restrictions for everything except for numerator fraction 1. It's okay if that one's 0, but the 0 can't be in any of those red spots. Once you've done that, you're going to keep, change, flip, and follow the steps to multiply. Remove common factors, not common terms. Leave your answer in factored form, and my favorite step, the check. So to simplify, we're going to factor, restrict, keep, change, flip, simplify. So let's try that. So step one is factor. So this might be a really good opportunity for you to practice your factoring. So you might want to pause the video, factor all 4 of those expressions, see if we get the same answer when you come back. So to factor everything, here is my first step that I'm going to do in factoring. And I don't have any greatest common factor, so I've done it in one step. So I've done my factoring. Now I'm going to move on to my restrictions. So remember, for the restrictions, I'm listing restrictions for everything except for numerator number 1. So looking at these restrictions, I have a restriction here of 0, of 2, of -5, -3, -3, and 2. We only need to state your restrictions once. So if you have multiple, like we have 2 2s and 2 -3s, you only have to state them once. So my restrictions, I'm going to put them over here so I have a bit more room in numeric order from small to big. So I have -5, -3, 0, and 2. So I'm done my restriction part. So now I am going to move to the keep, change, flip. So I keep my first fraction the same. I change division to multiplication, and I flip my second fraction. And now I like to move on to simplifying. So simplifying, I am looking for common factors to the numerator and the denominator. So I cancel these out in color so you can see them. The x plus 3 and the x plus 3 cancel. The x minus 2 and the x minus 2 cancel. Notice my canceling is only 1 to 1. What I mean by that is I can't cancel the 2x plus 3's with only 1. So it's only 1 to 1. Let's write out my final answer in factored form. X minus 3x plus 3 all over x times x plus 5. And it's listed with these restrictions. Okay, so let's go ahead and check this on the graphing calculator. So checking this on the graphing calculator on the next page because I don't have enough room. Here we go. Original into y1. Answer in y2. The check always happens in the table. So aside from the non-permissible values, you can see that y1 equals y2, which means I did my question correctly. Okay, let's try another one. So again, I feel like factoring is the hardest part of this question. So I would pause the video, go ahead and factor all 4 of those parts, the 2 numerators, 2 denominators, come back and see if you factored it correctly. So I go through and I factor every part of it. There is no greatest common factor that is numeric. I have x in the numerator 1, 4x in numerator 2, and then a trinomial and another trinomial to factor. Once I've done my factoring steps, I can go on to my restrictions. So remember, restrictions are for everything except for numerator number 1. Okay, so hopefully you're getting really good at these restrictions. They're just the opposite values. So I can state my restrictions and then I'll put them in numeric order. So the restriction for 2x minus 1, the opposite of a minus 1 is a positive 1. The opposite of times by 2 is divide by 2. If you don't like the shortcut, you can just set it to 0 and solve. The opposite of a minus 3 is a positive 3. Oh, I have a monomial of 4x, so that's 0. 1 minus 4x. This one's a little weird, so I'm going to do this one on the side for you. So I have 1 minus 4x can't equal 0. I'm actually going to add 4x to both sides to have a positive leading coefficient, and I'll divide both sides by 4. 1 over 4. And then I have 4x minus 1, which is also 1 over 4, opposite of minus 1, opposite of times by 4, and then the opposite of a positive 4 is a negative 4. So all I would do is put these in numeric order from smallest to biggest. So I'll start with my negative 4, I'll go to my 0, my quarter, my half, and my third. So I've done factoring and restricting. So now I'm going to move on to the keep, change, flip. Keep your first fraction the same, change division to multiplication, and then flip your second fraction. So it would look like that. And then my last step in this process is simplifying. removing common factors. So I have x minus 3 common to the numerator and denominator. And look in the blue here. I have same but opposite. 1 and -1, negative 4x and 4x. So those are same but opposite. So they simplify to be -1. Put the negative in the numerator. So I have x times 4x, which is 4x squared, times -1, which is negative, all over 2x minus 1 times x plus 4. And I'll leave everything in factored form. So always go ahead and check to see if you did that correctly. So in my check, I put the original equation into y1, and I put my answer into y2, and you can see aside from the non-permissible values, y1 equals y2, that's where the check always happens, so I know I did it correctly. So I want to do one question where we're combining the operations, okay? Anytime there's more than one operation, this goes for fractions, whole numbers, integers, you have to follow order of operations. So you might have learned it Bedmas, written horizontally. I write it vertically. So I write it as B, E, D, and M, A, and S. The reason I do that is because I want you to know that division and multiplication, adding and subtracting, they are at the same level. So dividing and multiplying, it's whichever comes first, left to right. And then lastly, adding and subtracting, whichever comes first, left to right. So when I write it this way, which is why I don't like writing it this way, it kind of looks like division comes first, but it doesn't come first necessarily. Whichever one comes first, left to right. So that's why I don't write Bedmas horizontally, I write it vertically. Same with adding and subtracting. Adding does not come first necessarily, only comes first if it comes first left to right. Okay, so anytime there's more than one operation, it is implied that you use order of operations. So you're going to follow all the steps that we did before, stating your restrictions and simplifying. So let's end with this question here. I want to, first of all, start by factoring. So I'm going to factor the numerator and denominator as far as I possibly can. So I do that. There we are. Difference of squares. 3 minus x can't be simplified. 12x squared minus 3x has a GCF of 3x. The denominator had a GCF of 6x. And the numerator and denominator of the last fraction are trinomials. Again, you have to be really good on your factoring. I recommend doing it off on the side on a piece of scrap paper and then just putting it exactly as I've shown here in your final answer. So once I've done that, I'm going to list my restrictions. Now I have a division question and a multiplication question. So let's look at where all my restrictions go. For the division question, which is the first two fractions, it's everything except for numerator number 1. For the last set, which is multiplication, it's only going to be the denominator of the second fraction. So let's look at my restrictions here. I have restrictions, and I'm just going to go from left to right, of 3, monomial for 0, 4x minus 1 has a restriction of 1/4, 6x is a monomial of 0, which I already have, 2x plus 1 is -1/2, 2x plus 1 I already have, x plus 3 has a restriction of -3. So I can put those in order from smallest to biggest. So I can say that x can't be -3, -1/2, 0, 1/4, and 3. So that would be my final restriction. Now that I've done that, I've factored, I've stated my restrictions, I'm going to keep, change, flip for the division, leaving the second multiplication by itself. So look, I did here, I did keep, change, and then I flipped, but this one here stays the same because it's multiplication. So what I've done is I've taken a question with division and multiplication and turned it into a question that just has multiplication. So now that I have it as multiplication, I can look at simplifying. So lots to simplify here. These, I love it when it works out like this. So see the purple here? These simplify to be -1 because it's same but opposite, x and -x. -3, +3. And I have x plus 3 and x plus 3, 2x plus 1 and 2x plus 1, 4x minus 1 and 4x minus 1, and then 6x divided by 3x is 2. So writing it all together, what I'm left with. In the numerator, negative 1 times 2 is negative 2. 2x minus 3. All over, look, everything canceled. It's just 1. I don't have to put it over 1. Let's actually just write it like this. Negative 2 times 2x minus 3. So I always like to check this. I'm going to do that on the next page. You can see original in y1, answer in y2. The check always happens in the table. So since y1 equals y2, you can see that I did it correctly. So that is division. I'm just wondering, since we've been dividing this whole lesson, when are we going to conquer? Get it? Divide and conquer. Okay, I hope you guys are going to conquer the homework questions. Practice 4 to 6, detailed solutions on D2L. Then you can move on to the textbook questions. So I hope this video helped, and I look forward to seeing you for the next one.